at 6 a.m. in Australia on the, what's it called? The mental world of the pre-1914 Social Democratic Party of Germany, SPD. And so they had a mental world we're going to learn about. And Andrew will talk for however time he takes, and then we'll go to open discussion as usual. Okay, thank you, comrades. This is Online Communist Forum organised by CPGB and Labour Party Marxists jointly. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Stan, and thanks for the invitation to speak to the group. So my name's Andrew Bonnell. I teach German history at University of Queensland, and I've been researching the history of Imperial Germany for quite some time, with a particular interest in the German Social Democratic Party and German labor movement history. And I guess the reason I'm speaking today is that Brill's historical materialism series, which is no doubt well known to many people here, has just published a book of mine, which draws on some older articles on German social democracy, but I also include some new research as well. Because it's been published by Brill as an academic book, it's outrageously expensive, but as many people will know, the historical materialism series does have a more affordable paperback publication in due course, so hopefully more people are able to get hold of the book then. So I guess the question is, why another book on German social democracy? In the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of work done on this topic, a lot of stuff published in that period, and there's quite a lively scene in German labor movement history, especially among UK historians as well as German historians. But since the 80s, there's been a kind of neglect among academic historians of labor history. It's kind of gone out of fashion, and in my view, this has skewed the work on Imperial Germany and this period of European history in general. There's been much more work on cultural history, on middle-class reform movements, and even a comeback of interest in the history of the aristocracy and the monarchy. History from the viewpoint of the elites has made a comeback, but there's been relative neglect of the history of German workers and the labor movement. And reading the work of some younger historians, it's clear that not all of the the older literature in this area is no longer being read much, and I think that skewed the image of Imperial German history or European history more generally. And this has been evident in the wave of books on the centenary of the First World War, where there's been a return to kind of history from the top down, and the history of workers has been relatively neglected. And so I think there's been a kind of creeping conservatism that's gone along with moves towards cultural history, although there's obviously been positive aspects to working cultural history as well. So I think there's been a need to kind of reassert the role of the working class in German history. There's also been a kind of I think a need to reassert the material aspects of German history with cultural history approaches sort of neglecting the material basis of the fundamental political class conflict that underlies German history in this period. This is the classic period, I think, of a German working class identity and of working class politics. There's also been a lot of work done on the ideological disputes within the SPD. I think people are quite familiar with that. But I was also interested in trying to recover the voice of the rank and file as much as possible. So to do that, I used a lot of sources such as not just the newspapers and magazines produced by German Social Democrats, but police records of meetings, and there's even an interesting collection of sources in the Hamburg State Archives of the political police spying on workers and eavesdropping on their conversations and taking notes on anything they thought sounded too subversive. And there's a real kind of treasure trove of material there, although there's a lot of daily routine stuff that can take a while to find interesting bits of workers' opinions in it, but also things like court cases. You can find this stuff. So I was quite interested in trying to recover the voice of the rank and file. And Stan's comment on the mental world, it's an awkward title, but I was trying to capture what historians talk about the history of mentalities and what actually motivated German workers to get involved in the in the politics of the labor movement in this period, and that meant trying to reconstruct what the rank and file of the party thought on various ways, and what kind of themes helped to motivate workers to support what was a mass party with 1 million members by 1914. 175,000 of them were women, even though women could only legally join political parties in Germany from 1908. The German Social Democrats were trying to organize women even before it was legal to do so. And I look at a number of different themes rather than trying to rewrite a chronological history. I looked some time ago at the what might seem a strange phenomenon of the cult around Ferdinand Lasalle, the founder of the ADAV, the General German Workers Association, in 1863, whose ideological shortcomings are quite well known, and the negative opinion Marx had of him is quite well known. But he was remembered in parts of Germany as the first leader of an independent German socialist party that broke with middle-class liberalism, something that happens in Germany earlier than in Britain, interestingly enough. And I look at the role that the personality cult played, but I also look at why it fades away by the 1890s. Once the party adopts a Marxist program in 1891, the Lasalle cult dies out fairly quickly after that. I look at the role of internationalism and nationalism in the labor movement. It's possible to come across assertions in the recent literature that the working class weren't that interested in the internationalist ideology of the party, but again, it's possible to find quite a lot of evidence of popular support for internationalism among the rank and file. There was a lot of interest in labor struggles in other countries. People collected money to support strikers in other countries. People support, maritime workers supported the strikes of, say, workers in Hamburg supported strikes in Scandinavia, and warned against any scabbing on striking workers in Sweden, for example. And there was massive interest in the Russian Revolution of 1905, with a great deal of sympathy for the Russian revolutionaries among German workers, a lot of money being collected to support families of victims of Tsarist persecution. So, and something which I've also written on elsewhere, the Social Democrat workers were very much anti-imperialist. They opposed Germany's colonial wars as not just on moral grounds, but also because of the fact that this was a sort of unnecessary expense which was passed on to the working class through indirect taxes. So there's a great deal of opposition among rank and file German Social Democrats to German imperialism. And you can find records of Social Democrat Party meetings where in Berlin, where the revisionist figures within the Social Democratic Party who were more sympathetic towards colonialism were very heavily criticized by rank and file members. Crucial to obviously any labor movement is the question of work, and so I've got a chapter on attitudes to work within the party, and it's I guess you know, surprising or not surprising on your, depending on your point of view on how little is actually written on work and labor in histories of this period. The sort of material basis of the way the economy was organized is taken for granted by a lot of recent historians. The attitudes to work are partly influenced by the fact that the leading sections of the party, there's heavy representation of skilled craft workers, and so there's a mixture of pride in work as well as opposition to the subordination of workers to the capitalist market, which is something that's experienced by even skilled craft masters as well as the new kinds of manual factory workers. And again, the you know, ranks of the party, especially party leadership, very heavy representation of skilled craft workers. And there's a lot of attention in the social democratic press to the issues of workplace safety and the number of workers' deaths in this period, which the party clearly attributes to, and the party's members clearly attribute to the you know, exploiting capitalists, particularly heavy losses of life in this period in the mining industry. And German government statistics show something like in the early 1900s, something like 10,000 deaths a year in work-related accidents, which over time, this is, in any single year, this is a horrendous death toll, which most histories of this period sort of don't even mention, but it's something that workers at the time are highly aware of. They talked about the battlefield of labor and the push for better safety legislation and so on. You know, if you had 10,000 being killed in a battle in any one year, an actual sort of military conflict, then there'd be sort of libraries of books written about it, but not so much the workplace deaths in this period. And towards the end of the period I'm looking at, you had workers already and party theorists already becoming aware of Taylorism and new methods of scientific exploitation of labor being imported from the United States. So that's already being registered before 1914. So I investigate what records we've got of German workers' attitude to the work process itself as something that could be fulfilling under a different social system, but as a sort of oppression and danger under capitalism. And I have a chapter on social democracy and the price of bread, the politics of subsistence in Imperial Germany. The Imperial German state relies very heavily on indirect taxes of the working class, and this affects things like price of beer, price of bread, price of meat. The tax system is very much skewed to the interests of the landowning classes. The German landowning, especially the Prussian landowning aristocracy, the Junkers, are able to leverage their entrenched influence in the political system to get the state to work for their economic interests at the expense of ordinary workers. What's quite clear is the extent to which workers are able to make the connection between the high price of meat, the increasing price of bread and staples like beer. Workers very clearly make the connection between the political system, which privileges the interests of the Junker landowners and imposes tariffs on food imports and grain and indirect taxes on workers. And it's quite clear that one of the reasons for the Social Democratic Party's success in recruiting members and voters in the period before 1914 is that it's very successful in campaigning around food prices and making the link between the cost of living for ordinary workers and the political interests of the landowning elites. In Imperial Germany, large numbers of workers have to serve in the army. There's compulsory military service, although not every member of every year group get actually required to serve, but everyone is kind of called up to be assessed by recruiting panels. The state is concerned that about the spread of socialist ideas in the working class, so they prefer to have young men from the country who are less influenced by socialist ideas, but they still have to enroll urban workers in the army as well. So there's a great deal of surveillance of known socialists in the army. The Social Democratic Party is a little bit cautious about the extent to which they pursue anti-militarist agitation among serving soldiers, although this is something that Karl Liebknecht particularly advocates. But there's a great emphasis on instructing young recruits about their rights as soldiers. And there's a constant campaign in the Social Democratic Party to expose the abuse of recruits and all of the negative sides of militarism, high rates of suicide in the Imperial German Army. And this is something which is continuously being emphasized in the Social Democratic press and by Social Democrat members of Parliament, the way in which the class structures of Imperial Germany express themselves in the abuse of army recruits and other abuses of German militarism. And no doubt many people are aware of the trial of Rosa Luxemburg in July 1914, on the very eve of the First World War, for insulting the German army, for talking about the abuse of recruits and the sort of massive embarrassment to the Prussian state when Luxembourg's lawyers start to document thousands of cases of abuse of recruits. And the case against Luxembourg on this charge, of course, she's already been convicted on another charge of inciting disobedience among German soldiers. But this particular case gets adjourned indefinitely because it's too embarrassing for the state to have documentation of thousands of cases of abuse of recruits. It's interesting to note that while typically people see Luxembourg as quite isolated within the party at this stage, that nearly all the German Social Democratic Party press celebrate this case as a huge win for the party over militarism. And it's ironic that it's just a few weeks before the outbreak of the First World War and the party's vote for war credits. I look at the question of the knowledge of Marxist ideas among rank and file workers, because since the 1970s, there's been a kind of widespread assumption among historians of the German labor movement that the level of reception of Marx's works was relatively low among rank and file workers. And in the 70s, historians started to analyze the records of workers' libraries, party and trade union libraries in cities like Berlin, and they discovered that, guess what, not many people are reading Capital Volume 1, not many people are buying copies of it. It's a relatively expensive book for workers. And so there's this argument that the level of knowledge of Marxist ideas among the rank and file is relatively low. I've questioned that by, instead of just focusing on things like how many workers are reading Capital Volume 1, let alone the other volumes, that if we look at the pamphlet literature of the party, which summarizes Marx's ideas, there's a vast pamphlet literature, grey literature. The party's newspapers often contain discussions of Marxist ideas, and typically the parties, every local party organization holds meetings of members at least once a month where people gather to listen to long talks, sometimes going on for 2 hours on a Monday or Tuesday night when workers have been working 9 or 10-hour days. They still gather in pubs, beer halls, wherever to hear long talks, and often these do deal with Marxist thought. And if we look at the various ways of diffusion of Marx's ideas, even if the number of people actually reading Capital from cover to cover is low, there is massive diffusion of Marx's ideas among rank and file workers through the pamphlet literature, through newspapers, and through meetings and word of mouth, and Social Democratic Party agitators and speakers actually have handbooks which tell them which works by Marx they should be trying to explain to workers, and there are model libraries for workers recommended by the party's cultural organization. Karl Kautsky's abridged version of Capital is very widely circulated, and the pamphlet with Kautsky's commentary on Capital and the Erfurt program is very widely circulated. So you've got hundreds of thousands of pamphlets being circulated. Also, every pub where Social Democrat workers gathered had the party's papers and magazines available to read, and there's plenty of evidence that workers did read and discuss the contents of these papers. So I argue there is much wider diffusion of Marxist thought among rank and file workers than some of the older literature assumes. I look at the cultural organizations of the party as not just as transmissions of ideology, but as opportunities for workers to self-organize, experience sociability with other workers, and topic that Ben is an expert on, Ben Lewis, who's recently written on Kautsky and parliamentarianism. I also look at workers' attitudes to the state and republicanism. You sometimes find assertions of popular monarchism in Imperial Germany, and it's argued that Social Democrats were reticent in advocating for a republic, but to you need to be aware of the German laws against lèse-majesté, which I guess, this is still a thing in Thailand, but in pre-1914 Germany, there are thousands of cases, hundreds every year, of mainly Social Democrats and workers being sentenced to periods, often 3 to 6 months in jail, for insulting the monarchy. In the 1890s, there's a better than even chance, if you're a German Social Democrat newspaper editor, that if you say something about the Kaiser, you'll end up doing a few months in jail. So there's massive legal repression of expressions of Republican sympathy. And there's plenty of evidence of ordinary workers being opposed to monarchism when the German public were called on to illuminate their houses on some particular royal festivity. The party press recorded that the working class sections of Berlin were all had their lights off that night to as a sign of non-obedience to the monarchy. So this idea that people are kind of won over by the cult of the monarchy. This is clearly not the case among the rank and file supporters of social democracy. Instead, there's a high degree of awareness of the Kaiser's anti-worker, anti-social democratic party rants, with the state intervening on behalf of bosses in industrial conflicts, sending the troops into the Ruhr miners' strikes of 1905 and 1912, for example, and the Kaiser ranting about the need to use weapons against striking workers. So, and people are very well aware of this. And again, even in workers' conversations in Hamburg pubs, the police record plenty of evidence of workers' anti-monarchical sentiments. So this idea that popular monarchism helps to support the system is quite flawed, and there's a lot of pro-Republican sentiment among rank and file workers. So right, so those are the kind of themes that I've covered in the book, and as I said, it's an attempt to kind of reassert the centrality of workers' experience and workers' perspectives in Imperial German history, which I guess has become increasingly preoccupied in recent years with the elites and has kind of moved away from the sort of material conflicts, which I think are very much at the heart of imperial German politics. So that's probably enough of a monologue from me. So if Ben Lewis wants to respond or take any broader questions, I'll hand back to Stan. Thank you.